Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Good morning, sir. Yes.
Okay. So, so today we are going to start one of the important concept of our .NET framework, right? And as a developer, right, when you are going to work for any industry, and if you are also working for any industry, then you might be know that is entity framework, right? Most of the project nowadays are developed using entity framework only. I'm not saying entity framework only. Yes, ADO.NET is still there. Some of the applications are still developed using ADO.NET, but most of the applications which we are going to develop nowadays is using entity framework, because entity framework is a help a lot of things, right? Actually, entity framework makes our life easy when we are going to interact with the audio, when we are going to interact with the databases, right? So it will make us to feel that yes, we are going to use the audio.NET, right? Even if we do not have that much experience into SQL Server database or Oracle Server database, MySQL database, right? Still, we can go and do the database CRUD operation, right? And for that, if you do not have any, I mean, if you do not have good knowledge on SQL Server or SQL, then also still you can do the database CRUD operation over the databases by using the entity framework. But as I mentioned, if you have SQL knowledge, then it is good for you to understand the concept very easily, right? So let us start today's session by discussing. So basically today I'm going to give you an overview of entity framework, what entity framework, what ORM approach, right? What is the problem with ADO.NET, how we can overcome those problems using ADO.NET as using entity framework, right? How you can develop application using entity framework. Those things are going to discuss today, right? And then so before 3.5, right? If you are developing any application using .NET Framework 3.5 or lesser, right? Then at that time, entity framework was not introduced, right? So if entity framework was not introduced, then only option you have is ADO.NET to perform the database CRUD operation, right? So if you are working on a project which is targeting .NET Framework 3.5 or any lesser version, then at that time you have to use ADO.NET. You have to use ADO.NET to perform the database CRUD operation over the databases. And whenever you are going for ADO.NET, right? Then what are the things that you need to do? First of all, you need to create the connection object, you need to open the connection object, you need to create the command object, right? Then you need to execute the command object using data reader or data adapter, right? So if you are working with the connection oriented environment, then you need to go with the data reader. And if you are working with this connected oriented environment, then you need to go with the data adapter. Again, when you are going with the data adapter, you have to use data set or data table to store the data in memory, which is retrieved from the database, right? And once you store the data in memory, then you can do the operation as per your business requirement, right? So this is the thing that you need to do, right? Without creating the connection object, command object, right? You cannot do all these things, right? Or if you are going with the ADO.NET means these are the mandatory things and you have to do this. And imagine multiple places you want to, multiple method are there, multiple classes are there, multiple controller, multiple right, multiple you can say multiple classes, multiple method, multiple controller, and different places you want to communicate with the database. You might be communicate from data access layer, business layer, presentation layer, right? Different layer, different model, different project, right? Uh, from many different places you need to communicate with the database. That means you need to do these things, and this is a time consuming process, error prone process. Why? Because you have to do the things again and again. If you are doing the same thing again and again, means it's a time consuming process, and later if you want to do some kind of changes, right, then it's going to be error prone process. And to overcome these things, right, Microsoft introduced a framework called entity framework. And what this entity framework is going to do, it is going to automate this database related activities for our application, right? Whatever we are going to do manually, right, from the creating object to fetching the data, storing the in the data set and data tables, right, all these things are going to be automatically done by the entity framework. And what we just need to do, we just need to provide the necessary details to the entity framework, right? Entity framework is not is going to do everything automatically. Yes, he is going to do automatically everything, right? But for that purpose, what information is required by the entity framework, that information as a developer, as a programmer, we need to provide. We need to provide on which database we are going to communicate. We need to provide on which database tables we want to interact with, right? If that a database having 100 tables, do you want to work with 100 tables, or you want to work with only few tables? That information you need to provide. Does that database having some storage procedure, some functions, right? Do you want to use those storage procedure or function in your application? Yes, I want to use these informations. We need to provide the entity framework, right? If we are not providing any information, right, then entity framework will not do all these things automatically. Automatically means he is going to do the database related activities automatically, right? But for that purpose, we need to provide the information, right? And once we provide the necessary details, then entity framework is going to do all these things automatically, right? Then what is exactly entity framework, right? So entity framework is an ORM tool or object relational mapping tool or framework, you can also say, that enables .NET developers to work with the database using .NET objects, right? So using .NET object, it eliminates the need for most of the data access code that developer usually needs to write. So two things we need to understand. What is ORM framework? What is ORM? That is what next I'm going to explain. .NET, right? It allows .NET developers to work with database using .NET object, right? So what exactly it means? See, in ADO.NET, right? In ADO.NET, if I want to paste the data from the database, right, then to the command object, I need to provide some TSQL statement. Yes or no? So I need to provide select star from an employee or select star from a department where department ID equals to this thing. That means when if you are using ADO.NET, right, then if you want to communicate with the database, then you need to use TSQL statement. But here entity framework saying, right, so you do not need to use TSQL statement, right? You do not need to use TSQL statement. You just use the .NET object, right? So whatever .NET object means, any class object, whatever you know, right? You are going to use .NET object. Behind the scene, I am going to generate the TSQL statement for you. I'm going to execute those TL statement in the database. I'm going to retrieve the TLSQL statement from the database, and I'm going to convert the result of those TSQL statement to .NET object so that you can work as per your requirement, right? So as a .NET developer, we are only going to interact with .NET object. .NET object means classes, right? And whenever we create an instance of a class, that is nothing but an object, right? Only we are going to interact with .NET object. Behind the scene, right, whatever required, how to create the establish the connection, how to generate the command, right, how to execute the command, how to retrieve the result, right, how to fill those results into the .NET object, all these things are going to be taken care by the entity framework. That means if all these things are going to be done by the entity framework, that means doesn't it eliminates the need for most of the data access code that a developer usually needs to write. That means if he is doing all these things behind the scene, that means it helps us. It eliminates for us, right? It eliminates the need for us to write the data access code, right? And we know as a developer, we generally writing this code, we generally needs to write the create the connection object, create the command object, right? Execute the command object, fill the data set, data tables. As a developer, we generally used to write this code. But entity framework eliminate these things, right? Entity framework handle all these things internally. As a developer, we are not going to do all these things. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So we have understand this. But what is this ORM? That is what we need to keep focus, because Entity Framework is an ORM tool, right? Please observe this image. Object Relational Mapping Framework automatically create classes based on database table, and vice versa is also true. That is, it can also automatically generate the necessary SQL to create a database table based on classes. What it means? It means suppose your data. So suppose you have an already existing database, and that existing database having three tables, right? Then this ORM framework will create three classes for you based on the database table. And going to the other part, in your application, you have created 5 classes, and you want for these 5 classes, the framework should create 5 tables on the database. Yes, that is also possible. That means it is automatically going to generate the necessary classes based on the database table, as well as it is also going to generate the necessary TSQL statement to create the database table based on the classes. Right? So this is nothing but one ORM framework. ORM framework means object relational map. Object means your .NET classes. Relational means your database table. So it is going to map your .NET classes with the database table, as well as database table with your .NET classes, right? So it automatically it will create the classes based on the database table, or it will create the database table based on your .NET classes, right? And in your application, right? Suppose you are developing one application, right? Then where the .NET framework come into the picture. So you have the presentation layer, right? Or you can say user interface layer, which is generally interact with the business layer. And business layer, you are having business entities or domain classes. From the business layer to interact with the database, you are communicating with the data layer, or you can say data access layer. And in between the data access layer and the database, entity framework will come into the picture, right? So from your project point of view, right, where entity framework will come into the picture in between the data access layer and the database. If you are not using entity framework, if you are using ADO.NET, then this data layer will direct interact with the database. But if you are using entity framework, right, then in between your data access layer and in your business, I mean your database, this entity framework will come into the picture. Clear? Guys?
Okay.
Right? So what exactly it means? From the database, it will retrieve the data. It will provide that data to the data layer, and in the data layer, it will store the data in the form of a .NET object. Right? So we'll see all this thing practically. Right? Now let us understand what this entity framework can do for us. Right? So let us understand what exactly the what advantages we are going to get, right, if you are using entity framework. Okay, for that purpose, what I'm doing, I'm having these two tables. I'm having departments table and I'm having this employees table, right? And this department ID, it is the primary key on this table, and employee ID, it is the primary key on employees table. And here department ID, it is nothing but your foreign key, right, which is pointing to the ID column of the department table. So there is a primary key and a foreign key relationship between these two tables. This ID, department ID in the employees table, is nothing but your foreign key, which is pointing to the ID of the department table, right? So what is our business requirement? We want to fetch all this department and employees data, and we want to display this data in the console like this. So first, so what is our requirement? First, I need to fetch department information. I need to print the department ID and department name and department location. Then how many employees are there in the IT department? That information I need to print like this. Then as we are having three departments, so you can see first IT department and their employees, then HR department and their employees, then sales department and their employees. I need to print like this, right? And to achieve this, what generally we need to We need to create a department employee classes. We need to write a ADO.NET code to retrieve the data from the database. Once the data is retrieved, we need to create a department employee object and populate them with the required data. Right? So generally with entity framework, but entity framework can do all of the above, right? For us, if we provide necessary database details to the entity framework, right? So before proceeding and before understanding, right, these things, right, how entity framework can do this for us, let us first do the same thing using what I can say. Okay, let me first delete this one. First, let me create the application using ADO.NET, right? Using ADO.NET, I will show the same example. Then I will see. Then I will again write the same code, right? And then again I will show you the example using entity framework, right? So you can see here I have created the database with the name entity framework DB, right? And in this database, I'm creating departments. It is the primary key and identity as well, right? Then I'm creating the employees table, right? In this employee table, this is ID is the primary key as well as identity. And this department ID, you can say it is a foreign key, which is referring to the department's table ID column, right? And here I'm populating the department's table, and here I'm populating the employees table, right? So this is the data, what you can see in this image, right? So let us first create a console application with the name EFDemo, right? So what I can say, I can use this is solution, right? Okay, so already this application is created, right? EFDemo. So do one thing. Okay, so where this application is created, go to that solution, EFDemo, right? So let me close this one. Let me delete this one, right? So let me open Visual Studio once more. Any Visual Studio version you can take into consideration, no issue, right? So let me create a new application. Give any name, whatever name you want. I'm providing EF demo, and I'm selecting .NET Framework 4.8. Right, clicking the OK button, right? So the project is created, right? So the project is created, right? Let us first write the code, right? Without using ADO sorry, without using entity framework, I mean using ADO, right? So you know these things very well. How to use ADO. So first of all, you need to create the connection string. Then you need to create the connection object. Then you need to create the data adapter object. So in this case, I'm having two select statement, right? Select start from department and select start from employees, right? That means whenever I fill the data set, right, then actually behind the scene, two data tables is going to create it. One with the data table index position 0, and the rest one is data table with the index position 1. So I'm just fetching the data table 0 into this employee data table, and data table 1, right, index position 1 with, into the employee data table. So this is my department data table. This is my employee data table, right? So department's data will store here, and the employees table's data will store here. First, I'm looping through the department's table, right? Looping through the department's data table, and I'm printing the department name and the department location, right? And then you know how to create a data view with the filter, right? So we have already discussed this type. So I'm creating a data view, the employee data table dot default view. This is one option. Other option is also there to create a data view. Can anybody tell me what is the other option? By using the data view constructor, right? So you have to create data view like this, and to the data view, you need to pass the data table like this. So this option is also there, right? So once you create the data view, then you can apply the row filter, right? So now for this particular data row, right, whatever the department ID is selected, I want to print those department information. Then what is this condition? Department ID equals to whatever the value, right, department ID number. and then it will only filter those data, and I'm just going to print those information. And you know what is this, right? So row ID. So you have to fetch the data row, and then you just need to print the data, right? So this is what we already discussed, right? Let me run this application, and you should get the data. You should see the result as expected. Yes, that is fine. Any question from anyone related to this example? I'm not explaining this thing in detail because we have already covered everything. Guys, hello, guys.